Machine translations are as old as, I guess, biblical times. And it kind of started at a time where we had um, Babylon and the Tower of Babel. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Tower of Babel, but according to the book of Genesis, people were trying to build a big tower to reach the heavens. And God was kind of upset about that because he wanted people to spread all over the globe. And so he essentially confused people by changing their languages. I'm not sure exactly how that was done, but people started to babble different languages, and things didn't go very well. The tower was abandoned, and people started to separate in different countries and continents. Well, anyway, since then, there have been many people who have tried to fix the problem and get people to be able to talk to one another. So there was an age of translators, and where people were able to learn different languages and were able to translate from one country to another, or one area to another one. Maybe 150 years ago or so, it was customary, especially Western Europe, for everybody to learn Latin and Greek. And the basic there was that Latin was the basis for many of their Romantic languages. Greek, of course, was for Eastern Orthodox. And so if you knew those two languages, you could more or less get along visiting different countries. I never learned Latin or Greek, but I do know the Cyrillic alphabet, and I found it quite useful when I was in Greece to be able to read, at least make out what the words were saying, although I couldn't translate it. Language learning in schools was very, very familiar, and especially in Europe. In the US, it kind of was abandoned after a while, and today I think it's coming on a rebound. Um, but mechanical learning language is something that people dreamed about, and it isn't rather new. In the 9th century, you have Arabic cryptographer Al-Kindi. He developed a systemic language translation system. Um, then in 1629, Rene Descartes proposed a universal language, which is something familiar. People here that use it today. And then going in 1930s, uh, Georges Arthur applied the first patent for translating machines using paper tape. Basically, what he had is two dictionaries, let's say, and compared words and tried to make out what the sentence was. Later, Peter Turyansky developed a bilingual dictionary and dealing with grammatical roles of different languages. That was a big problem because grammar between languages is one thing, you can translate the word, but verbs, adjectives, adverbs, and endings are quite different. Going fast forward now, we get into 1954, and there was a Georgetown experiment, which was successful because it actually was able to translate more than 60 sentences from English to Russian. This is the time where we had one foe, essentially, Soviet Union, and so the concentration was to read and find out everything in Russian and be able to translate it into English. Of course, the Russians did the same thing, trying to understand English. However, by 66, expectations really did not result in rapid progress in machine translation, and funding dried up, and mostly funding was done by the Defense Department. And in the US, second language in schools was de-emphasized. So we had a period of time where the majority of American kids really never learned second language unless there were some exceptions or private schools. Of course, in the 60s, we have something very familiar to all of us, namely Star Trek, and they had a universal translator. And here you can see Captain Kirk having a universal translator talking to some alien species. So I think it was quite a going deal with respect to science fiction, that universal translators were here, ready to use, and we could meet aliens or other species and be able to quickly understand them. Well, that quite didn't work out. However, as many gadgets that you found in Star Trek movies or TV series, people decided that that was a good idea and they were going to work on it. One place where universal translators were very, very important was in the military. And so, in spite of dried up funding, DARPA, especially the Defense Project Research Agency, funded a number of projects. And here we have one that you can see an Army veteran or Army soldier using to talk to a local. This was very important during the Iraq War and subsequently when we started dealing with Middle Eastern countries. There were not too many Americans who knew Arabic, and so we had to figure out a way of dealing with this. Later, DARPA continued to work, in fact, to this day, and they have this program called the MedCat. And if you can think about it, if you're sitting in your council and you want to read or listen to foreign broadcasts and you have no idea what the language is, it really would be helpful if you were able to figure out quickly what the language is, what the person is speaking about, or what's the image. And so these are ways that you can classify easily the language you're speaking. You can categorize it, listen to broadcasts, political, what have you, and try to understand what is going on around the world. It doesn't require you to travel. All you have to do is have a good connection and you are in. The program that DARPA has now has a language, 11 languages: Arabic, Chinese, Dari, Farsi, Hindu, Spanish, Russian, Pashto, and Korean. So anyway, this is where the military is, and I would say they probably are far ahead of what is available commercially. Today, I wanted to concentrate on the kind of 3 commercial entities, or 2 especially, that I want to talk about: Google, Microsoft, and Apple, although I think most of them use the Google or Microsoft systems. If you go to your machine, Windows 10 machine, and you Google Translate, you'll probably find a page like this. And it's very handy. It has a Google Translate on top. It has text, documents, so that you can copy a whole document and insert it into this space, or you can type your own text. Now, it works both ways. You can put something unfamiliar here and put English and it will translate it, or you can put English in here and then translate it into some other language. And so let me just show you here. One of our people here in the audience got a email, and it was spam, but he really couldn't make out what it said because the on top here it was in Mandarin, Chinese characters. And so what I did was I copied that and I translated it. And as you can see here, it was a hacker trying to extract money from whoever he sent it to, and not realizing that maybe people that get this insert in Mandarin will not be able to read it. Um, anyway, going on, Google Translate is another way of dealing with this. I have a Polish cousin, and she speaks English, but not very well. And as far as writing, it makes it very difficult for her. And so what we decided to do is basically she would write in Polish emails, and then I would use the Google translate it into English. I would then reply to her in English, translate it into Polish, and send it to her. And we find that we can technically correspond very well this way because although I can understand Polish to a certain extent, technically I'm illiterate. And so anything more than fourth grade kind of a conversation, we really find this to be very useful. Um, I have some, for example, handwritten text in other languages, and I'm trying to translate it. So I'm using OCR, and then hopefully I can convert it to that language and then translate it using Google Translate. It's a little complicated, but if you're dealing with 100 and plus year old manuscripts written, fortunately, their handwriting is quite good. I hope to be able to translate it. Another thing that you might want to think about is when you go to some foreign websites, I would be very careful, obviously, because that's where the hackers come in. But if you know the site, and for example, here this is a site for the Ministry of Education and Science in Ukraine, and you notice here it's in Ukrainian, but over on the right-hand side there's a thing, you hardly see it, but it says in English. Now, you would think that if you clicked on in English, that this would be completely translated. Well, guess what? That's not the case. Here is the text. When you push English, it says International Education Projects. If the actual translation of that website is State Standard Basic Secondary Education. So my kind of statement here is that if you are interested in translating a website that's in a foreign language, your best bet is not to use the translation that the originator puts in, but use Google Translate to translate the website. And you might have to do a copy of it and then go into Google Translate and do it that way. If you find out that it's this, the actual translation is good, then you don't have to worry about it. But as you can see here, if I just relied upon the translation in English, I wouldn't be getting what the website said. So finally, I want to say that I have a iPhone 7, and I find it to be very, very useful as I travel around the globe, or I used to before the pandemic. For example, the Google Translate on the iPhone has a face like this, and it's very easy, English to Ukrainian, or you can put whatever language you want. Now, if you want to have a full translation capability, you first have to download a dictionary in the particular language. So, for example, when I went to France, I downloaded the French dictionary. And so here, instead of Ukrainian, it has English and French. It allows me to put in the English text and I get the French word or phrase or sentence. I can do a camera, a snapshot of, let's say, an advertisement in a French store that I can't read because I don't understand French. I take the snapshot and I convert it and I get the English translation. I can handwrite whatever I want to do on the iPhone, or I can have a conversation. Now, unlike the military uh, translator, this is probably you know a much older version of it, but it works pretty good. If you want to ask a conversation, find a location or a restaurant, you can put in here in a voice in your English, and then it will come out in French, and then the French person will speak in France and French, and you will get the English translation. Uh, Most French speak English, so that's not a problem. But if you go outside of Paris and some other places, you might find this to be very useful. Or you can just say voice and then one way street. So it's a very handy thing. The only thing is you have to prepare yourself that if you're going to France, you put in the French system. If you go to Germany, you download the German. It's not a big file, but you don't really want to store more than 2 or 3 dictionaries on your phone. Anyway, I just wanted to let you know that if you have friends or colleagues and you like to keep up with them, but maybe there is a language barrier, to modern technology allows you to converse with them, exchange notes, and it's like there is no barrier, language barrier between the two of you. I found this to be very useful with my friends in Tokyo. The Japanese, again, their English is okay, but now I can just write to them and they write back to me. And it's almost like, you know, there is no barrier at all.
Does anybody else know about this package? For example, when you use it, can you use it with the cellular off so that you don't use any data?
I've used it, and you can use it cellular off. That's what downloading the dictionary is about,
All right,
so that you
thank
don't have to go anywhere. Another thing that you can find with Google Translate is that if you're at a sign or an advertisement that's a picture or a menu in a restaurant, you'll do the same thing. You just take the camera and point it at it, and it does a pretty good translation of things like that in real time.
Yeah. By the way, there is some sort of a navigation system called Here We Go, which works the same way. Namely, it's like it senses the GPS, receives the signals, and spots your position on the earth as long as you download the map of the country that you're in advance.
I have 2 examples of where I've used kind of translation, and one of them has a moral associated with it. Back, maybe 25 years ago, Raytheon had a contract called Savam, which was a project in Brazil. And in Brazil, they speak Portuguese. So there were an enormous number of documents that had to be translated back and forth between the Americans and the Brazilians. And we used, I think that's, now the name is going out of my brain, the one that Jerry has used, the company that.
Dragon Systems.
Dragon Systems. So we used Dragon, and the translations, even though it was 25 years ago, were pretty good. But then we had a number of contracts that had to go back and forth. And that's where the moral is. We used the translator to translate the contracts, but then brought that to a specialist in the language who actually tuned the words to make sure that they were really accurate, because you couldn't trust what the translator said. Now, admittedly, this was some years ago, but even today, I would be nervous about using any of these automated translators for something that's really, really important. The other example that I had was 2 years ago. I was in Japan, and I was in a restaurant trying to understand how their buffet worked. They had a long set of explanations, and there were two college girls sitting next to me, and they could tell that I was very confused. So they tried to speak to me in Japanese, which I didn't understand. And then one of them pulled out her cell phone and spoke into it, and it said, you know, are you having problems with your ordering? And I grabbed a hold of her cell phone and I answered her in English, and we used it for about 5 minutes. It was fantastic.
So I don't know, Jerry, were you going to jump into just how to use Dragon?
Right.
Or is this a reasonable time to talk about just exactly what technology we're talking about and sort of at 50,000 feet how it works?
Oh, well, I can talk about Dragon.
Because I could spend a few minutes and talk about the high level technology and what's going on.
Okay.
If that makes some sense, it'll help people understand.
Okay with me.
And by the way, about 3 years ago, we had an executive from Dragon come in and give a talk to the group. I don't know if anybody remembers it or whether, I'm sure it wasn't recorded back then.
So George touched on what was going on here a little bit. So going back in modern history, speech recognition and translating are really two different sides of the same coin. It all evolves to this thing that we've come to know and love called pattern matching. So early speech recognition would work on just taking voice and transcribing that into some sort of words. So, and one of the things that Dragon does and many of the other speech recognition products do is they go through a training process first. What the training process does is use carefully selected words that contain key phonemes, sounds in words that can be used to tune the algorithm to your voice, so that when you speak something, the phoneme knows how you're pronouncing it and what that translates to internally in terms of a neutral language, and then what word you're supposed to be using. So that's sort of step one, and that's early language translation. The other side of that is how do you make sense out of it? And that's a parallel technology called natural language processing. And that's something that we take for granted all the time. We type something into Google as a sentence, or we speak something into our phone using Siri. And whether we speak it in correct, grammatically correct English, or we speak it in phrases or whatever, somehow Google and Siri and lots of other search engines magically figure this out and figure out what we're trying to ask. And so that's a whole different technology that goes into analyzing syntax and understanding what goes on. And so those two technologies, going back to, say, the 70s, became available in terms of public domain. A lot of it existed, as George talked about, in the global domain in the military, and it was available. But they were developed independently. The syntax recognition, there was a product called Forest and Trees. There was another one called Intellect, and they were both local companies. And they were able to work grammatically incorrect syntax into a real query against the database and give you answers. For example, I worked for the company that had a product called Intellect, and they would sit on top of an IBM database at the time, and you could say, for example, how many blonde cab drivers were working in New York City picking up female passengers on Sunday? And it would able to parse that out and understand what's going on and come back and give you the appropriate answer. And that was a big deal at the time, because before that, searching in a database, the search algorithms existed, but it was an art in terms of looking at the syntax and how you put the right words in. If you put them in the wrong order, you would get different results from putting them in, order A versus order B. You might get different results that are not correct. So that flippant technology was a big deal, and that has grown. Voice recognition is a different side of the same coin, in that you take these sounds that people make and they parse them and put them together into words. We talked about a little bit earlier, we have regionalisms in English alone, and you can imagine the regionalisms that you have all across the globe to universalize this. So the regionalisms have to be parsed out and then understand what's going on. What companies like Nuance did and Dragon Naturally Speaking did is use the training words to understand what phonemes you were using. And then they were able to take the phonemes, string them together, and say, what word were you trying to speak? And they did that with increasing levels of accuracy as the technology got better. On top of that, you have the synonym problem. When you say to, what do you mean? TO, TOO, or TWO? And that became a problem of looking at the syntax of what was going on. And that was another level of understanding. And I think at a high level, that's really where we've started. And then the products today have taken that, and with the computing power and with the pattern recognition software that we have, it has grown to the point where we have it on our phones, we use it all the time, and it sort of becomes second nature to us. And I think at 50,000 feet, that's really what the technology is all about. Jerry, go ahead.
What I'd like to do is I'd like to share my screen and just show you how you get into Dragon and what you do. I'm pulling this down so that you can see it. This is the Dragon bar for the commands. But here I'm in Microsoft Word. I'm going to do it through the keyboard. I'm going to turn on the microphone, and then I'm going to do some dictation, something we just know. That's it. We, the people of the United States, in order to perform a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So that's pretty accurate. Now I must have the punctuation on, because see how they put the commas in?
Yeah.
That-
The only mistake I see, Jerry, is by you, where you said perform instead of.
Oh yeah. No, there's a couple of mistakes in here.
The beginning isn't so great.
Right.
Now, if I correct that,
We gave the United States. That's right.
no, I could have done that by voice, but I'm just showing you how to correct.
Uh-huh.
And the problem is
It
when
has-
you still have to proofread it. It's not infallible, but it's pretty good to do that. And you can either do it with or without punctuation.
Now, also, you can put in your own dictionary so that if you're a doctor with words that they don't have in their dictionary, they can be included.
Well, I have done that, but let me just do it the fast way. Say I did this all the time. Say I was busy, I had a job writing constitutions. I could just say this it has a macro function. Constitution preamble.
Well, that's
Just-
cheating.
Well, it isn't cheating, because if you do a lot of stuff that has all the does a lot of formatting all the time, then it's very helpful to have that. So now let's just go through how you get into it. Okay. Can you see this Dragon menu bar here?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So when you first start, you're a user. And now it just so happens there's only one user for my program, c'est moi. So I don't have to open a user, it just opens to me. Now it's it opened to me even though I had it open. So it's putting my files in there. I made many files over the years and I transferred them from computer to computer. So let's see. Now you go to tools. And here's where you get started here. You can, for example, that you want to optimize your acoustical settings. So you would go like this. You check your audio settings. I'm using a Plantronics headset. And now this one is going to just get the position of the microphone and the volume. It's not listening to my voice for speech recognition. In this step, the computer listens to the sound of your voice and adjusts the volume setting for your microphone. When the computer has finished adjusting the volume, so it finished and it's decided that's a good volume. Now it's going to look at the quality of my speech. In this step, the computer checks the audio input from your sound system. Having high quality audio input is very important for good speech recognition. Poor audio input will make it difficult or impossible for the program to recognize your speech accurately. When the computer has finished checking the audio quality, it beeps to signal that the test is complete. If you reach the end of this text but you have not heard a beep, start reading the text again from the beginning. Okay, so now it passed. Then what you want to do is general training, and I'll just do the first part because I can get out of it. The second part I can't without completing it. As Peter said, this is general training where it's going to start looking at the phonemes. Welcome to general training. It was just looked at those phonemes. Training is about to begin. Now it's done with the phonemes, and now it's going to, I'm going to just cancel that.
Yeah.
And then what you do is general training where you read excerpts from books. And I won't do it because you can't get out of the book once you start. Each one's about 10 or 15 minutes. And you just read into it and it just keeps analyzing your voice. I have a Quincy accent to an extent, but it cost my father thousands of dollars to get rid of most of it. But it gets used to my accent. And then you're into doing the functions. And you can go to your email and it will scan your email and put those words in. Or if you have other documents that you've done a lot, it'll put them in. So it makes a very large dictionary of your words. Now, I started to use it in my office. I think I started with Dragon 2.0 and it wasn't very good. And I had to construct the whole pulmonary dictionary. At which point they came out with a medical dictionary called Dragon Dictate Medical or something. But that wasn't very good either because the medical dictionary was a mile wide and an inch deep. That it had some pulmonary terms, but it had orthopedic terms and dermatologic terms and neurologic terms. I didn't need any of them, but I needed all of the pulmonary terms. So I didn't use it. I just stayed with Dragon Naturally Speaking and made my own dictionary. And over time, it became pretty good. At first, it was only good for letters that I wrote to doctors because they're very stylized. But then as the computer got faster and as Peter brought out, it could look at the Dragon file, which is like a WAV file, and it would look that and compare it to its database. And it got faster so that it could keep up with you and more accurate. So I could then use it in the office for office visits, which are much more wide ranging than the medical letters. I forgot to show you one thing. The commands here. You can do everything that's in Microsoft Word, almost everything, except highlight. You can do it like color it red, italicize that. And interestingly, if you, okay, so say, subscript that. Oops, I didn't do it. Subscript that. Subscript that. It's not doing it, but it should do it. Subscript that. Subscript. I won't get. I can't seem to get there right now, but it does some of those commands. I don't really use that. I don't really use that very often, but I usually just use the keyboard. But it does some of the commands. It doesn't work well with ODF because it doesn't use the same base as docx files. It's not suited. It doesn't do any commands and the fancy things. It'll do simple dictation with Office Libre and those things. So that's the story with the Dragon systems. I found it wonderful. You get good at it after a while, and you don't really have to. You can dictate your own punctuation. It doesn't. It was very good when you're not under the pressure of a dictation system where you have to get things in order. You can go back and change the text.
One other piece of trivia that Jerry didn't talk about is that today we see real-time captioning in a lot of programs, especially the news programs. And Nuance had a piece of software. It was an appliance that was sold to the networks that enabled to capture the video and produce the captioning in real time. And that was an early product that they have. So I don't know if they still sell that or where it stands, but that was one of their early forays into the media as well.
So I have a remark about translation of Japanese, and I've studied Japanese for many years and have, started back when it was all done on paper. So if you needed to look up a Chinese character, you would have to do it from a dictionary and count all the pen strokes in the character and look it up by that index, or you could find components of the character that had fewer strokes and go by that and then look it up by that index. Either way, it was a couple minutes per character. So boy, it was a slog working through text. Now, I wish it were possible to cut and paste text into Google Translate and get a decent translation, but boy, that is one of the most poorly served languages right now, possibly because it's so difficult, but the translations are weak, especially when you look at how well it translated the Chinese email about the Bitcoin ransom. That I thought was very clear, but Japanese usually comes out all upside down. But I will point out to everybody that if you need to do this, the OCR capabilities, so optical character recognition capabilities that are in the phone apps, they're now available to look up the characters for you. And of course, that's not very hard to do electronically. So that's a huge in terms of productivity for anybody who is trying to climb that mountain. What used to take several minutes to look up a character is now effectively instantaneous, including all the readings and what you need to know to parse your way through it. So big strides there, even if it's not as convenient as Google Translate.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think in general, it's interesting to note that Google and Amazon both have an excellent application programming interface and offer a lot of these services at what seem to be very, very good prices. And so, for example, I've been using the reverse of a lot of this, which is text-to-speech to automate the production of narrations of walking tours. And the quality of the speech using Google text-to-speech is quite remarkable in terms of voice inflection, different characters, and it no longer sounds mechanical like Stephen Hawking. They really have made amazing improvements with machine learning in terms of the pace at which passages are read. And so that's an interesting, another related activity. Also, it's also going to put spoken word artists out of business, I think.
Well, Harry, were you present when I did a presentation a year or so ago on deepfakes, where we showed Amazon's offering on deepfakes?
Yes, I did see that, and it's I mean, quite frankly, the deal for voice artists these days is that you can now train using machine learning a profile so that you can offer your services generated by text to speech, and you get a voice sounding pretty good. I mean, it's not as good as if you do it yourself, but you could automate your talents by recording your voice profile.